Hey guys, I'm back again and I'm here for day 5 of Vlogmas. So today I am here to discuss the podcast that I run with my buddy Christy, and it is called Brown Girls Booking Podcast. And we've been on a bit of a break for the moment, but we will be coming back at the beginning of 2024 with more great in-depth discussions on our literary picks. Today, I am here to talk about season 2 of our podcast and some of the books that we have been reading. Christy and I take time to give you an in-depth discussion on these different literary works, and we don't take up, loads of your time while doing it. So hopefully you will be intrigued enough once I talk about some of these books that we've discussed in season 2 that you'll want to go over there and listen. So if you see me looking down, it's because I've got my iPad here with the info that I need. So the first book I'm going to talk about is Bonjour Tristesse, and that's by Françoise Sagan. And this is a French writer. Now, this is a French modern classic. I had not read it yet, and I suggested it when we were looking for something that was outside of the U.S. because we don't only want to just read U.S. works. We want to read, works from all over the world. So I said, how about trying Bonjour Tristesse? Because Christy said she hadn't read it. So what we did was I read Bonjour Tristesse, and I read it in French, and Christy, she read it in English, and we discussed it together. So Bonjour Tristesse is the story of a father and his daughter. They live on the French Riviera in a beautiful home, overlooking the Mediterranean, et cetera, et cetera. The only problem is they no longer have the mother in the picture. She is no longer there. So the father and the daughter have made a bond that is extremely close. So what that means is that the daughter is raised a little bit like as if not like she's a child, more like she's a friend. And as a result of this lax upbringing, it's made the child forget, her, not really understand what her place is or where she's going. We also see that the father is a bit of a philanderer, and he's always got the women around him. I think the book opens with him he has a girl with him, a young woman with him. And then in the process, he then has another old girlfriend come back into his life while the other girl is there. And that woman is a woman who was friends with his wife. And we quickly see that relationship between this woman and this man, there's a lot going on there. A lot more going on, and a lot more that makes us wonder if they weren't actually having an affair when the wife was in the picture. So I think the wife is dead now. So this is an interesting look into a dynamic between the daughter, the father, and his women. And it's written in a very simplistic fashion. It doesn't seem to be extremely extraordinary. It doesn't seem to be extraordinary in the way it's written, but it is an interesting look into a dynamic that is not run of the mill. So I highly recommend you read it. It would be something that would be good to discuss in a book club. The next book on my list is My Cousin Rachel. This one, I absolutely adored My Cousin Rachel. This was my second Daphne du Maurier book. The first one I read by Daphne du Maurier was Rebecca. And so when Christy suggested we do a du Maurier, we decided not to do Rebecca, but to do something a little different. So we both went for My Cousin Rachel. So this is globally about a young Philip Ashley who is an orphan and who is subsequently raised by an older cousin. And Ashley and Ambrose is the older cousin. They form a particular bond where their house their property, everything about their property screams, this is a man's world. Okay. So Ambrose, so the older cousin, eventually has to go off to Italy for business or something. And while he's there, he falls in love with a young woman there and decides to marry her. From this point on, everybody's a little bit, particularly Philip, is a little bit worried because he's getting these letters from Ambrose that they don't seem to make much sense. So he soon is embroiled in a mystery where he's going to meet his cousin Rachel, and he's going to understand or try to understand what that connection is between Rachel and Ambrose, and subsequently what connection are they going to have, the two of them. So it's another story that's told with a lot of intrigue and mystery. We don't know what's going on. We only have snatches of clues which make us think a lot of different things. I highly recommend it. It's a really, really interesting book. You can't go wrong with Daphne du Maurier. Okay, the next book that we read was East of Eden, and that is by John Steinbeck. Great classic, one of my favorites from Steinbeck. So this is a story that discusses two sons, one that is born from one woman and the other one is born from another woman. And here again, we see a bond between father and sons. This is a man's world. So it's very interesting because right off the bat, we can kind of see that the father has, he's leaning more towards liking one son than the other. And very quickly, the sons both realize it, but it is a subject that they do not discuss with each other. I highly recommend this book because it takes us through the life in California in the earlier period. And not only that, but it talks about love, inexplicable love. And not only that, but the consequences of the absence of love, I think, is one of the main things that it discusses. But it does it in such a, it's very literary, but it's very consumable. Much more consumable than some of Steinbeck's other books. I find it one of those books that you can read and reread. So actually, this was my second rereading of East of Eden. And I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I'm sure I'll read it again at some point. Next book on my list is A Raisin in the Sun, and that is by Lorraine Hansberry. And this was a play that we decided to read. Now, I hadn't read this play yet, and I hadn't seen it either. But I highly recommend that you actually see this play. You can Google it and you can watch it over there on, you can watch it over on YouTube. And if you might be able to watch it on other streaming services. So I suggest you just put in A Raisin in the Sun and see if you can see it. So what I did was I watched it first and then I went back and read the play. And we discussed it, and both Christy and I absolutely adored this play, which discusses this idea of the desires that Black people have for their family and for their livelihood, and this idea of not everybody in the family wanting the same things, but in the end, those things that they want will bring them somehow together. I highly recommend you watch the play. It's just brilliant, the writing, brilliant, the examples that Lorraine Hansberry wrote to give us an understanding of the difficulty of African American families and them trying to get out of, the ghetto and get into a house in a real neighborhood with, better everything around them, better schools, better life, better everything. It's so good. So good. I watched the one that had Esther Roll playing the mother. Um and I thought it was really good. Highly recommend it. Okay. The next book is The Concubine, and that's by Elichi Amadi. Now, this book, I was expecting a lot from it. So basically, this is a book about a woman who is married and very quickly becomes a widow because her husband dies. And I can't tell you any more of the details around that. But what we see very soon after is another young man who falls in love with this woman and he wants to marry her. But from the norms and the mores of this particular tribe, they're not allowed. The widow is not allowed to just like get married like that. It doesn't work like that. It's not possible. And so we see how this cultural myrrh really affects the woman, but not only that, the man, and then all of the people around, that live in their compound and that kind of thing. I think the thing that was missing was it was missing the way the writer wrote the woman. I felt was not exactly right. It didn't feel right. But and then I felt like it was maybe a little wordier than it needed to be. I think I gave it a 3 stars. I mean, I think it's something that you should read because I think it is one of those books that's considered in the list of African books that need to, the canon of African books that you need to read. But I didn't enjoy it nearly as much as I enjoyed like Bushia Macheta's books. So yeah, there you have it. Okay, the next book we read was Brown Girl, Brown Stones. And this is by Polly Marshall. This was an interesting book as well because it discusses a couple that is from the Caribbean that are living in the U.S. and they have 2 daughters, and their father is a bit of a dandy. So he likes getting dressed up. He likes going out. He likes doing everything except for working. The mother, on the other hand, is a hard worker, but she's a ball buster. And I mean that literally. Like, she busts balls. She cracks skulls. And what we see here is a story where we have the mother and the father have different ideals for their future. So we have the mother that wants to get ahead, earn money, buy a house, maybe rent some houses. The father has this idea of, I want to get some money and I want to go back to the Caribbean. I want to build my house there, my white house, right near the water, and I want to live out my days. So we have two people that are married with 2 different objectives. So they're at this push and pull. And at the same time, their daughters are kind of getting the fallout from all of this. And so we see how, as the story goes, we see how this affects the main character of the story, Selena. I think it's Selena, her name. And Selena, we see how all of this affects Selena. It is a coming of age book. It's set between the Great Depression and World War II. But it's really interesting. I think we both, Christy and I, enjoyed the second half of the book better than the first half. And I think it's because it felt like Polly Marshall really knew what she was talking about in the second half of the book. In the first half of the book, it seemed like it was something she was trying to recreate and wasn't fully aware of, what she was writing. So it doesn't come off feeling as real as the second part of the book. But I highly recommend it because I think it's something you should read, in my opinion. Okay, the next book we read was Housemaid of Dawn, and Housemaid of Dawn is by N. Scott Momaday, and it was Christy who picked this one up. I had not heard of N. Scott Momaday, but we were looking for something that would be a little different from our reading, and it was Indigenous writing. I didn't get along with this one very well because I felt that it was very, very experimental and modern the way it was written. Although I did get, I would say, feelings from different parts of this particular novel. It's not very long. It's 208 pages, and I will surely reread it another point in time because I just didn't seem to be able to get into the novel like I wanted to. But it really follows a young man who has come back from the war, and he is traumatized by this war. And he is trying to find his way between his indigenous roots and fitting into the American way. It's really, really interesting, though, the way it's done, but I think it's very, a little bit too experimental for me, and I would need someone to guide me through that if I read it again. That's just me. Okay, so the next book we read was Ragtime by E.L. Doctorow. And this is a story that takes place between, so it's the turn of the century up into World War I, if I'm not mistaken. And here we have a plethora of different characters, some that are real life people that have been put into the book, that talks about this idea of change and acceptance of change from one century to the next. So we have a smattering. It's hard to explain this one because you have people like J.P. Morgan in it. You have Henry Ford. You have Sigmund Freud. You have a lot of people in it. And what he does is he uses all these famous people in order to evoke the change that happens. And there's one of the main characters has difficulty with this change. He's not ready. And in turn, you'll have other little side stories that make up what we call Ragtime. I highly recommend it. I didn't love it when I first started reading it, but as I continue on with it, I started to get into it. I think in the end, I wind up giving it 4 stars. I think I did. I gave it. Let me just see. Yeah, I think I gave it 4 stars. But when I started reading it, I was like around 3 stars for like a good 30% of the book. So I was quite happy once I'd gotten a little bit past that 1/3 mark. And it was like, oh my God, I'm loving this. I'm loving it now. Because there's certain characters that I enjoyed reading about in the book more than others. But highly recommend it. I have not watched the movie. I'm thinking about maybe trying to watch that movie. I don't know where I'm going to watch it though, just so that I can see how that compared to the book. Anyway. Okay, the next book we read was called Territory of Light, and that was by Yuko Tsushima. This is Japanese work, and it was Christy that suggested this one because I'm not very up on Japanese lit like that. I only know like a couple people. But she said, oh, yeah, Yuko Tsushima, we should read this. I said, okay, fine. And in the end, I gave it about 3 stars. I did enjoy it, though. I did enjoy the book. I didn't love it, but I enjoyed it. So it talks about a young woman who is married and has a small child, and she wants to divorce her husband. So this means she divorces her husband. In Japan, divorced men do not have they don't have to take care of their children once they're divorced. So she still wants to do it because for some reason, I feel like deep down inside, she feels like her husband loves the child more than he loves her. And we then see the struggle of this young woman to raise her child, live her life, do her job, and then at the same time be confronted with so many people telling her, oh, it's too bad you're divorced because, oh, you should try to get back with your husband because, while she's trying to get through all of this. Okay, I'm not going to lie, she's a terrible mother. She's a terrible mother. And you kind of feel for the child and you also feel for the mother. But what Tsushima does is she has a very good way about talking about light throughout the entire novel, which I thought was pretty freaking brilliant. And she does get that cloistered feeling that we have when we're reading about this young woman living with her daughter in this very particular apartment, in this very particular apartment building. I highly recommend it. It's not something that's on everybody's list or anything. It's not particularly, it's not particularly new. It came out in 1978, but I think it has some things that, I find interesting. Okay, the next book on my list that we read for season 2 was A Severed Head by Iris Murdoch. Okay, so I was the one who said, let's read some Iris Murdoch. So in the beginning, we were going to read another Iris Murdoch, and then we quickly stopped reading that one and said, nah, this ain't the one. So we decided to go, I said, well, let's go with The Severed Head. So she said, okay. And we went with The Severed Head, and it was fantastic. Severed Head, I think I gave it 4 stars, and it is sort of like, I think it's Iris Murdoch's 5th novel, but it's actually my first Iris Murdoch because I haven't read any other Iris Murdoch. But this one is interesting because it's a story of adultery. So you have these, you have this one central couple, and then you have these other people, friends, or however they're related to the couple, and how there's this adultery thing going on. And my goodness, it brings out some of the worst in people. But Iris Murdoch is brilliant at writing men. I don't know how she does it, but all of the male characters that she decides, to really write, she writes them brilliantly. And she also writes like women who are kind of aloof and crazy and, trying to pretend like they're sane. She does that really well too. I highly recommend you read A Severed Head. I think this is a book that would make a great book club discussion because, my God, they're up to everything in this one. Really, really good. Okay, last but not least, I have The Bride Price by Bushi Amashita. So this is I think this is my 3rd or 4th Bushi Amashita. And this one is about a Nigerian girl who goes to study so that it will enhance her bride price. The thing about this one was, I think this is one of the first books that Bushi Yamashita wrote, but it's not my favorite. I think my hands down favorite is The Joys of Motherhood and then Second Class Citizen. This one doesn't cover, I think the style of writing is still a little bit, it's not as, I don't know, it's not as informative. I don't know if informative is the right word. I found like I was slightly taken out of the story for this one. I really felt like I was on the outside looking in, where some of the other ones I really felt like I was right there in the room. And I think that's what made the difference for me. Now, Christy, on the other hand, who has not read any Bushi Yamashita, she loved this one. But I told her, I said, but if you read Second Class Citizen and The Joys of Motherhood, this one is immediately going down to the bottom. So she kind of agreed with me with that. It's possible that could happen because this is the first novel. And Christy is probably nicer on first novels than I am. I mean, I try to be nice on first novels, but I think she's nicer on first novels than I am. So I highly recommend you check out Bushi Yamashita, but not this one. In particular, like I said, The Joys of Motherhood or Second Class Citizen. So that is all I have for you today. Those are all of the books that Christy and I discussed on Brown Girls Booking in the 2nd season. I hope that you will come and give a listen when we get back in January, or just go and give a listen now. There's season 1 and 2 are up. Let us know what you think about it. Drop us a line, comment. We'd love to hear from you. And that's all I have for you today for Vlogmas. I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.